The well was dying. Josiah Barnett stood at its edge, listening to the bucket scrape against dry stone. When he pulled it up, nothing came but thick brown mud. Useless. The third week now. Same result every dawn. He wiped his hands on his pants and studied the horizon. The Arizona sun was breaking over the eastern hills, painting the sky in deep crimson. Beautiful country. Brutal country. The kind that swallowed men whole and never apologized. 60 head of cattle stood in the dusty corral behind him. Their ribs showed through their hides like prison bars. Another week without water, and they would start dropping. When the cattle died, so did everything Josiah had built over 7 hard years. That was when he felt it. Someone was watching. The sensation crawled up his spine like ice water. Josiah did not turn around. His hand moved slowly to the Colt at his hip. Fingers rested on the worn wooden grip. Waiting. The feeling came from the west, from the hills that marked Apache territory. He had lived here long enough to know the difference between animal eyes and human eyes. This was human, patient, deliberate, measuring him. Josiah still did not turn. He let his hand rest on his gun, sending a message across the distance. I know you are there. I am not afraid. After a long moment, the feeling faded. He finally turned and scanned the western ridge. Nothing moved except scrub brush trembling in the morning wind. But he knew they would return. Josiah Barnett had traveled west to bury his past. 17 years earlier, he had been Sergeant Barnett of the Union Army. He had stood in the cornfield at Antietam while 3,000 men died around him in 20 minutes. He had fired his rifle until the barrel glowed red. He had stepped over bodies stacked waist-high, hearing screams that still echoed in his dreams. When the war ended, home was no longer possible. Ohio meant neighbors who would call him Hero. But heroes did not wake screaming at midnight. Heroes did not see dead boys whenever they closed their eyes. So Josiah went where nobody knew his name. He found this patch of land at the edge of Copper Creek Valley, 180 acres that nobody wanted. The previous owner had been found with 3 arrows buried in his spine. Josiah bought it anyway. 7 years now. He had built his cabin with his own hands, dug the well that was now failing him, raised cattle that were now starving, kept entirely to himself. Town folk called him the hermit, the Indian lover, the coward who refused to join hunting parties when Apache raiding stories spread through the saloon. Josiah let them talk. He had seen enough killing. He wanted no part of choosing sides, no part of looking at another human being through rifle sights. All he wanted was silence. But Arizona Territory in 1881 had other plans. She watched him for 3 days before he spotted her. Nalin moved through the tall grass without sound, the way her father had taught her since childhood. Tarek had sent her to observe this white man who lived too close to their boundary, to learn his patterns, to decide if he posed a threat. She expected the usual: arrogance, carelessness, the casual cruelty of people who believed land belonged to whoever wanted it most. This one surprised her. He worked alone from sunrise until dark, never shouted, never fired his gun at shadows the way cowboys in town did when they were drunk or bored. When he spoke to his horse, his voice carried a gentleness that seemed wrong for a man of his size. On the 3rd morning, she made a mistake. A pebble shifted beneath her foot. The sound was barely a whisper, but his head snapped up instantly, and his eyes found exactly where she was hiding. Neither of them moved. Nalin expected him to draw his weapon. They always drew their weapons, but his hand stopped at his holster. Rested there, a warning without a threat. She rose slowly from the grass, letting him see her fully, showing him she was not afraid. 200 yards separated them. They stared at each other across that distance, and something passed between them that Nalin could not name. Then she turned and walked away. Measured steps, controlled pace, refusing to hurry. She felt his eyes on her back until she disappeared over the ridge. That night, drums echoed from the western hills. Josiah sat on his porch, whiskey in hand, listening. The rhythm was slow and steady, not a war beat, something else, a gathering, a council deciding matters that would ripple outward like stones dropped in still water. He thought about the woman he had seen, the way she had stood when he spotted her. Straight spine, lifted chin. Most people would have run or attacked. She had simply looked at him and walked away on her own terms. There was strength in that, a different kind than he was used to seeing. The drums continued until midnight. Then silence swallowed the valley. Josiah slept badly. Antietam dreams, blood and cannon thunder, boys calling for mothers who would never hear them. He woke before dawn, his pillow soaked through. Nalin returned to her village as the sun faded. Her father waited outside his lodge. Tarek was 55 years old, but his body remained hard as the mountains surrounding their land. His face had been weathered by decades of sun and wind into something that revealed nothing. He had been war chief for 20 years. He had buried 2 wives and 3 sons. Nalin was everything he had left. "What did you see?" he asked. "One man, lives alone, tends cattle, his well is failing." "Is he dangerous?" Nalin paused. Her father's eyes sharpened. "Speak," he commanded. "He saw me watching. He did not reach for his gun." Tarek absorbed this in silence. Firelight flickered across his features. "The elders have decided," he said finally. "Our spring grows weaker every day. Children must walk farther to find clean water. Old ones say this white man's well is draining the underground rivers. Can a single well do that? It does not matter what is possible. It matters what is true." Tarek placed his hand on her shoulder. "Return tomorrow. Warn him. If he refuses to close that well, there will be blood." Nalin nodded, but as she walked toward her sleeping mat, one thought refused to leave her alone. He did not reach for his gun. Memory found her that night, as it often did when sleep would not come. She had been 12 when the sickness arrived. White man's disease, her father called it. It swept through the village like wildfire, taking the youngest and oldest first. Her mother had fought longer than most. For 3 weeks, Nalin sat beside her, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, forcing water between cracked lips, watching her grow smaller each day. On the final night, her mother's hand had gripped Nalin's wrist with surprising force. "Remember this," she whispered. "Strength does not require hatred. A warrior can be fierce without becoming cruel. Promise me." Nalin promised. Then her mother was gone. After the burial, Tarek transformed. The warmth in his eyes vanished. He stopped speaking of mercy or balance. He spoke only of survival. "Emotion is weakness," he told his daughter. "Enemies will use it to destroy you. Learn to feel nothing. That is how you stay alive." Nalin learned. She became the deadliest warrior among the women of her tribe, the fastest, the most precise, the most controlled. But sometimes in the darkest hours of night, she wondered if her mother would recognize what she had become. Nalin came to the ranch at midday. She rode openly this time. 2 warriors remained visible on the ridge behind her, a clear message. She came from a position of strength. Josiah was repairing fence posts when he saw her approach. He set down his tools and walked forward, stopping 15 feet away. She was striking up close. High cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to see through walls, a pale scar running along her left forearm, a warrior's scar. "You dig too deep," she said. Her English was clear but accented. Josiah raised an eyebrow. "The well? It drinks from the same water that feeds our springs. You are killing our water." "That well existed before I arrived. I did not dig it." "That changes nothing." Her voice remained level, controlled. "Our children walk farther each day searching for water. Our elders grow weak from thirst. Your well is responsible." Josiah felt heat rise in his chest but kept his voice steady. "Look around. See those cattle? They are dying. You think I am thriving while your people suffer? Your hardship does not erase ours. I never claimed it did, but I am not your enemy. You are a white man standing on land that belonged to my people for 1,000 generations. That makes you my enemy, whether you choose it or not. They faced each other, tension crackling between them. Wind kicked up dust that swirled around their boots. I will not close that well, Josiah said quietly. It is the only thing keeping my cattle alive. Nalan's jaw tightened. Then you have made your choice. She turned her horse and rode toward the ridge without looking back. Josiah watched her disappear, his hands curled into fists. The next morning brought different visitors. 5 riders approached from the east. Good horses, new rifles. At their head rode a man in a black coat that cost more than Josiah's entire ranch. Silas Crenshaw, the biggest landowner in the territory. 3,000 acres and always hungry for more. Crenshaw did not bother dismounting. He smiled down at Josiah like a man examining merchandise. Mr. Barnett, I have a proposal for you. My land is not for sale. You have not heard my offer. Do not need to. The answer is no. Crenshaw's smile remained fixed, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Difficult times are coming, Mr. Barnett. Apache growing restless, water disappearing. A man alone out here, no friends, no protection. He let the words hang. I have managed alone for 7 years. Perhaps, or perhaps you awake one morning to find your barn in ashes and your cattle scattered across the desert. Crenshaw gathered his reins. Consider my offer. You have 1 week. He rode away without waiting for a response. Josiah stood in the yard, watching dust settle. Something was deeply wrong here. Crenshaw's visit, coming right after Nalan's accusation. The drought hitting everyone at once. He needed information. He knew exactly who to ask. Ezra Dunn had fought beside Josiah at Antietam. They had stood back to back in that bloody cornfield, firing until their arms refused to lift their rifles. When a Confederate bayonet took Ezra through the thigh, Josiah had carried him half a mile to the surgeons. They had been brothers ever since. Ezra's ranch lay 10 miles east. When Josiah rode up that evening, Ezra was waiting on his porch with whiskey and 2 glasses. Figured you would show up eventually. Josiah dismounted and accepted the offered drink. Crenshaw visited me yesterday. He visited everyone. Same threat wrapped in a different words. Sell cheap now or suffer later. What do you know about the water situation? Ezra leaned forward, lowering his voice. I rode up to the headwaters last week. Wanted to see why everything was drying up. What did you find? A dam, hidden in a narrow canyon where nobody goes. Professional construction, concrete and timber. Someone is diverting the underground water away from every ranch downstream. Josiah felt cold certainty settle in his gut. Crenshaw. Has to be. He has the money. He has the motive. Dry everyone out, buy their land for nothing. Then he controls all the water in the valley. But the Apache blame the settlers. The settlers blame the Apache. Ezra nodded grimly. That is the genius of it. Make both sides hate each other. When the shooting starts, Crenshaw collects whatever remains. Josiah drained his whiskey. I have to warn them. The Apache. That is suicide. They will kill you before you speak 10 words. If I do nothing, war is coming. A lot of people will die. Josiah stood. I watched too many men die for lies already. I will not stand by and watch it happen again. Ezra studied his old friend for a long moment. Then he sighed heavily. You always were the stubborn one. Try not to get yourself killed. 3 nights later, everything changed. Nalan was returning from a scouting mission when her horse stumbled in the darkness. She fell hard, her shoulder slamming against rock. Pain exploded through her arm. Blood soaked through her sleeve. She tried to mount again, but dizziness overwhelmed her. The world tilted and spun. The village was too far. She would bleed out before reaching it. One light glowed in the darkness. West, the white man's ranch. Everything she had been taught screamed at her to ride the other direction, accept death before accepting help from an enemy. But her mother's voice whispered through the pain, "Strength does not require hatred." Nalin turned her horse toward the light. Josiah heard hoofbeats and grabbed his rifle. He opened the door expecting trouble. He found Nalin slumped over her horse, barely conscious, blood dripping steadily from her arm. She tried to speak. Only a whisper came out. Then she slid from the saddle. Josiah caught her before she hit the ground. Inside the cabin, lamplight cast unsteady shadows. Josiah worked quickly, cut away her sleeve, cleaned the wound. It was deep but clean, a gash from the rock she had struck. He stitched it closed with careful hands, then wrapped it in fresh bandages. Nalin watched him through half-closed eyes, her jaw tight against showing pain. When he finished, neither spoke for a long moment. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why what? Why help me? I called you enemy." Josiah tied off the bandage. "You needed help. That is reason enough. The world does not work that way. Maybe not, but I do." Silence stretched between them. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, the lamp flame trembled. Nalin sat up slowly, testing her arm. Pain remained, but manageable now. She should leave. Every instinct told her to leave. She did not move. "I was taught that emotion is weakness," she said quietly, "that survival requires feeling nothing." Sounds like a hard way to live. "It is the only way I know." Josiah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I spent 4 years in the war, saw things that still find me at night. Afterward, I tried to stop feeling too. Thought it would make the memories lighter. Did it work? No, just made me hollow. The memories stayed. The emptiness only made them louder." Something cracked inside Nalin. A wall she had been building since she was 12 years old, since her mother died, since her father taught her that love was just another word for loss. "I do not know how to be anything else," she whispered. "Maybe you do not need to know. Maybe you just need to try." Their eyes met. The cabin felt very small, very warm. The air between them grew heavy with everything neither could say. Nalin moved first. She grabbed his shirt and pulled him toward her. Their lips met in a kiss that was not gentle. It was fierce and desperate and angry. It was surrender and battle wrapped together. It was two people drowning, reaching for each other because there was nothing else to hold. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Nalin pressed her forehead against his. "That kiss," she said, her voice shaking, "it was only for you. No one can ever know." Then she pulled away, moved to the door, mounted her horse. She was gone before Josiah could find words. He stood in the doorway for a long time, staring into darkness. Everything had changed. Consequences arrived with the morning sun. Josiah rode into town for supplies. Sheriff Wade Hollister intercepted him outside the general store, blocking his path with a thin smile. "Barnett, someone spotted an Apache horse near your place last night. Care to explain?" "Nothing to explain. I live near Apache territory. Horses wander." Hollister stepped closer. "Crenshaw says your time is running short. 3 days to reconsider his offer." My answer stays the same. "Then God help you." Inside the saloon, conversations died when Josiah entered. Men who had nodded to him for years suddenly found their drinks fascinating. When he left, someone spat on the ground behind him. Word had spread. Josiah Barnett was an Indian lover. In Arizona territory, there was no worse accusation. For Nalin, judgment came at sunset. Tarek waited outside his lodge, arms crossed, face revealing nothing. "Where were you last night?" "I was injured. I needed shelter." "You found shelter with the enemy." Nalin's blood went cold. "How did you—" "It does not matter how. It matters that you chose his roof instead of dying with honor." "I did not want to die." "Warriors do not always choose." The elders gathered as darkness fell. Nalan stood before them while they pronounced sentence. She was not banished. That would have been kinder. Instead, she was erased. Her voice in council was stripped away. Her place among the warriors was taken. She could remain, but she no longer belonged. Tarek spoke last, still refusing to meet her eyes. You have chosen. Now live with it. He walked away. Nalan stood alone in the darkness, understanding that she had lost her father as completely as she had lost her mother all those years ago. 2 days later, Ezra arrived at Josiah's ranch with news. He threw a leather satchel onto the table, breathing hard from the ride. I found proof, maps, letters, documents showing exactly where Crenshaw built his dam. Josiah spread the papers across the rough wood. Everything was there. Construction plans, payment records for workers brought from California, a letter from a territorial senator promising military support once the Indian problem was resolved. This could stop a war, Josiah said, or start one. Depends on who sees it first. Josiah made his decision. I need to show this to Tarek. If the Apache understand Crenshaw as the real enemy, they will kill you before you open your mouth, especially after what happened with that woman. Maybe, but if I stay silent, more people will die than I can count. Ezra shook his head slowly. Same damn fool I met at Antietam. Running toward impossible odds because it feels right. That fool carried you half a mile with a hole in your leg. Yeah. A reluctant smile crossed Ezra's weathered face. He did. Josiah rode into Apache territory at first light. They captured him within the hour. 3 warriors surrounded him, arrows drawn, faces hard with hatred. I need to speak with Tarek. I have information that could save his people. They bound his hands and led him to the village. Tarek was waiting. The man who dishonored my daughter comes here willingly. His voice was soft, which made it more frightening than shouting. I came to save lives, not to lose mine. But I will accept whatever judgment you give after you hear what I have to say. Something flickered in Tarek's eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. Speak. Josiah told him everything. The hidden dam, the diverted water, Crenshaw's scheme to turn Apache against settlers while he stole land from both, the documents proving every word. When he finished, silence hung over the gathered tribe. Then a voice rose from the crowd. I believe him. Nalan stepped forward. She had been standing at the edge, watching. Now she walked into the center of the circle, head high, meeting her father's eyes for the first time since her punishment. I have seen this man's heart, she said. He could have let me die that night. He chose to help me instead. He is not our enemy. Crenshaw is. Tarek studied his daughter. Old pain moved across his features. You defend him still? After everything? I defend truth. That is what you taught me. Father and daughter stared at each other. The entire village held its breath. Finally, Tarek turned back to Josiah. Show me this dam. They rode out after dark. Josiah led the group. Ezra, Nalan, 3 Apache warriors. They moved through the hills without torches, navigating by starlight and instinct. The dam lay hidden in a narrow canyon, guarded by 6 of Crenshaw's men. Campfires flickered at the entrance. 2 guards at the front, Josiah whispered. Probably 2 more at the dam itself. 2 sleeping. Ezra checked his rifle. I can take the ones by the fire from that ridge. Nalan touched the knife at her belt. I will handle the others. Josiah looked at her. Are you certain? Her eyes met his. I have been fighting since I could walk. Do not doubt me now. They moved into position. Ezra settled on the ridge, rifle trained on the campfire below. When his first shot cracked through the night, everything happened fast. The 2 guards by the fire dropped before they could rise. Josiah charged the canyon entrance, firing twice, hitting one man in the shoulder as he reached for his weapon. Nalan moved through the darkness like smoke. She found the guard at the dam fumbling for his pistol and took him down with a single strike. The second emerged from a tent behind her. She spun, blade flashing in starlight, and he fell without a sound. Within 3 minutes, it was over. They stood before the dam, 30 feet of concrete and timber blocking the natural flow of water, blocking life itself. "Destroy it," Nolan said. They worked through the remaining darkness, planting charges of black powder that Ezra had brought, packing the explosives into cracks in the structure. At dawn, they retreated to high ground and lit the fuses. The explosion rolled through the canyon like thunder. When the dust cleared, water was rushing through the shattered remains, flowing back into its natural channels, flowing toward Apache land and settler land alike. But one guard had escaped during the fight, vanishing into the darkness. By noon, Crenshaw would know exactly what they had done. Crenshaw's response came faster than anyone expected. 30 armed men rode toward the Apache village before the sun reached its peak. Sheriff Hollister led them, shouting that Apache had attacked American property, that the time for tolerance was finished. Josiah heard about it from a rancher's son who had refused to join the mob and ridden hard to warn him. He pushed his horse faster than he had ever pushed an animal in his life. He reached the narrow valley leading to the Apache village just ahead of Crenshaw's men. He positioned himself in the middle of the trail, rifle across his saddle, blocking the only path forward. 30 men stopped before him. "Move aside, Barnett," Hollister shouted. "Cannot do that, Sheriff." Crenshaw pushed his horse to the front. "This is not your fight, old man. You made it my fight when you built that dam and blamed Apache for a drought you created, when you tried to start a war so you could steal land from both sides." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of these men were honest ranchers whose water had dried up. Men who had been told Apache were responsible. "I have proof," Josiah continued, his voice carrying across the valley. "Documents showing Crenshaw built that dam. Letters from a senator in Washington promising military support once the Apache were eliminated. He has been playing all of us for fools." Crenshaw's face twisted. "He is lying. The savages have corrupted him." "Then explain why the water started flowing again the moment we destroyed your dam." More murmurs. Men were looking at Crenshaw differently now, suspicion replacing certainty. "Kill him!" Crenshaw screamed. "Kill them all!" But before anyone could move, riders appeared on the ridge behind the mob. Ezra sat at the head of a dozen ranchers, men who had seen the documents, who understood how they had been manipulated. "We read the proof," Ezra called out. "Every man here has been lied to. Crenshaw has been stealing from all of us." And on the opposite ridge, Tarek appeared with his warriors, not attacking, just watching, making their position clear. Crenshaw was surrounded. Tarek rode down slowly, stopping beside Nayland, who had positioned herself near Josiah. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. "You were right," he said quietly, "about him, about everything." Nolan felt tears threaten, but held them back. "Father, you have your place back. You have earned it." He turned to face Crenshaw. "Now let us finish this." The standoff stretched tight as wire. Hollister made the first move. The sheriff drew and fired at Josiah in one motion. The bullet went wide, but it shattered the fragile piece. From the ridge, Nalan's arrow was already flying. It took Hollister through the throat. He was dead before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted. Crenshaw spurred his horse and ran. Josiah charged after him, both men firing as they raced across the valley floor. A bullet caught Josiah in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He stayed in the saddle through pure will, still pursuing. He caught Crenshaw at a creek bed, tackling him from his horse. They rolled through mud and stone, fighting for the gun between them. Crenshaw was younger and desperate. Josiah was wounded and furious. They struggled for the weapon. It fired once, wild, the bullet disappearing into the sky. Josiah drove his elbow into Crenshaw's face, loosened his grip, and ripped the pistol away. He pressed the barrel to Crenshaw's forehead. "Do it!" Crenshaw spat through bloody teeth. You do not have the courage. Josiah's finger tightened on the trigger. He thought of Antietam, the bodies stacked like cordwood, the screaming that never really stopped. He thought of Nayland, of the kiss that had changed everything. He threw the gun aside and drove his fist into Crenshaw's jaw instead. Once, twice, until the man stopped moving. I am finished killing, Josiah said, standing over him. But the law is not finished with you. 4 weeks later, Silas Crenshaw stood before a territorial judge. The evidence was overwhelming. The documents, the testimony from workers he had hired, the body of a corrupt sheriff on his payroll. Crenshaw received 20 years in federal prison. The senator who had promised him support resigned in disgrace. Water flowed freely through the valley once more. Josiah was repairing his fence when Nayland appeared. She rode in from the west, alone this time. No warriors watching from the ridge, just her. She dismounted and stood beside him, looking out at the valley they had saved together. My father says I chose the right man to trust. Did he truly forgive you? He says I have my place back, my voice in council, my position among the warriors. She paused. But more importantly, he looks at me again. He sees me. What will you do now? Nayland was quiet for a long moment. I do not fully belong with my people anymore. I am not white. I am somewhere between two worlds. Josiah set down his tools and turned to face her. I have a barn that needs rebuilding, cattle that need tending, and I am a terrible cook. Nayland almost smiled. That is the worst invitation I have ever received. I am not skilled at invitations. She studied him, this man who should have been her enemy, who had risked everything to tell the truth, who had kissed her like she was the only person left in the world. In my language, she said softly, there is a word for someone who stays when everyone else leaves. We call them the one who remains. It is considered the highest honor. What are you saying? I am saying I will stay. For now. For now is enough. They stood side by side, watching the sun sink toward the western hills. Her hand brushed against his. Neither pulled away. Ezra visited 3 days later and found them working together on the barn roof. He laughed and shook his head. Never thought I would see this. Times change, Josiah replied. That they do. Ezra's expression grew serious. I heard troubling news in town. Crenshaw has a younger brother down in Texas. Word is he is gathering men, swearing revenge. Josiah looked at the horizon, then at Nayland, then back at his old friend. Let him come. Nayland descended from the roof and stood beside Josiah, her shoulder pressed lightly against his. This time, she said, he will not be facing one man alone. The setting sun painted the Arizona sky in shades of deep red and burning gold, the same colors as the morning Josiah had first felt someone watching from the western ridge. Everything had changed since then. Somehow, against all odds, it had changed for the better. In Arizona territory in 1881, boundaries were drawn by blood and broken by courage. Josiah Barnett and Nayland had learned something that most people never understood. The hardest battles were not fought with rifles and arrows. They were fought against fear, against hatred, against everything the world insisted they should be. They had chosen differently. They had chosen truth over safety, compassion over suspicion, each other over the expectations of their separate worlds. And in a land that offered no mercy, that demanded everything and promised nothing, their choice was the bravest act either of them had ever made. Some boundaries are carved by history, others are built from hate, but the ones that truly matter are drawn by the choices we make when everything tells us to walk away. Josiah and Nayland chose to stay. They chose to remain, and sometimes remaining is the most courageous act of all.